Good afternoon, everybody. It's Thursday. Today we are still on our book, Anxious for Nothing by Max Lucado. This will be the last podcast that we'll be doing on this book. Today's lessons or topics are going to cover contentment and peace of mind. I'm going to just give a real brief overview um, on something that I wrote 3 months ago. We had done a series on contentment back in January. Um, but I just want to mention over the years, the United States is probably, is the most discontent nation in the world. Um, we are a very unsettled people, and we still have not figured out what needs and wants are. So, the first part of this podcast tonight is going to talk about what contentment is through a Christian perspective. I'm going to turn it over to Alexis. She's going to do a preview, and then I'll come back and talk more about it.
Yes. So this preview is found under chapter 7 and it's titled The Great Gratitude. I'm going to read the first page, and like Ken said, I'm going to turn it back over to him to read some of his pieces on contentment. It says, "The wildest river in the world is not the Mississippi, Amazon, or Nile. The wildest river on earth is a body of water called If Only. Throngs of people stand on its banks and cast longing eyes over the waters. They desire to cross but can't seem to find the ferry. They are convinced that the If Only river separates them from the good life. If only I were thinner, I'd have a good life. Or if only I were richer, I'd have a good life. If only the kids would come, if only the kids were gone, if only I could leave home, move home, get married, get divorced. If only my skin were clear of pimples, my calendar free of people, my profession immune to layoffs, then I would have a good life. The If Only river. Are you standing on this shore? Does it seem the good life is always one if only is oh my goodness. Does it seem the good life is always one if only away? One purchase away, one promotion away, one election, transition, or romance away? If so, we've traced your anxiety back to one of its sources. You're in a hurry to cross the river and worried that you never will. Consequently, you work long hours, borrow more money, take on new projects, and pile on more responsibilities. Stress, debt, short nights, long days, all a part of the cost of the ticket to land the good life, right? Not exactly. Opined in the Apostle Paul, the good life begins not when circumstances change, but when our attitude towards them does.
Okay, thanks, Alexis. Okay, yeah, I want to just over the next 15 minutes or so talk about what Christian contentment is. And I'm going to refer to a book we studied earlier. It was called The Rare Jewel of Christian Contentment by Jeremy Burroughs. And he starts out his book drawing from Philippians 4:11, where Paul says, "For I have learned in whatever state I am to be content." And that's kind of the theme of Max Lucado's chapter that we're going to be covering tonight. The definition of contentment, according to Jeremiah Burroughs, is contentment as understood from a Christian perspective is the inward, peaceful, and gracious state of mind that is characterized by a free submission to God's decision and a genuine joy found in his will for every situation. Now, from this definition, there are a number of key aspects that shape the believer's relationship with God and their experience in everyday life. And I'm going to go through those now, explaining some in more detail than others. The first one is contentment is an internal experience. It is something that takes place within the soul rather than being dependent on external circumstances. It's the inward submission of the heart. It is the silencing those internal distractions that hinder my focus on God as I seek to hear his voice guiding me to a content heart. In the Christian faith, we refer to this as prayer, a time spent before the Lord in a quiet manner before him. The next aspect of contentment is the calmness of the heart. Everything is peaceful and still inside. The calm and gracious state of mind is not in opposition with each other. It is a time where we can freely share our heart and complaints with God. The next contentment is contentment shapes the spirit's attitude. The presence of contentment positively influences and transforms one's attitude and outlook. When our spirit is aligned with the Holy Spirit, it produces the proper attitude of contentment. It excuse me, I misplaced my note here. It freely submits to and it finds satisfaction in God's decisions. It is a willingness, not forced, to submit to his decisions. It's an act of my will, so it's a willing choice. It's an attitude of being ready and willing to be content. Contentment is accepting and finding satisfaction in God's decisions. It accepts God's ways and thoughts, recognizing they are higher than our ways and our thoughts. God's thoughts, plans, and understanding far surpass human comprehension, much like the vast distance between the heavens and earth. Contentment finds joy in God's will. True contentment is marked by a joyful acceptance of God's will, regardless of my personal desires. Contentment recognizes God's control. A content heart understands and accepts that all circumstances are under God's sovereign control. Contentment remains steady in situations, whether facing difficulties, enduring trials. Contentment enables the believer to remain steadfast and unshaken. Accepting hardship as it comes as part of God's plan for the duration and the length of affliction, regardless of the type of situation one may be in, knowing it is God's will and plan to bring you contentment. In addition to that, a lot of times, or many times, God will direct us to go through troubled waters. And many times he takes us through those troubled waters, those tribulation times, first of all, to test our faith, but secondly, to help us understand that he will keep us in that situation until we deliver or develop a level of contentment. And when we develop that level of contentment, he then will remove us from that trial because he's accomplished what his goal was in that process. This is very similar to what Max Lucado is talking about in this chapter. He's talking about gratitude and contentment is a mindful awareness of the benefits of life. Grateful people tend to be more empathetic and forgiving of others. People who keep a gratitude journal or a contentment journal are more likely to have a positive outlook on life. Contentment and gratitude leads us off the riverbank of if only and escorts us onto the fertile land of already. As Paul said, I have learned to be content in whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who has strengthened me. That comes out of Philippians 4:11 through 13. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Alexis, and she's going to start talking about the spirit of spirit of peace, which you're going to find the spirit of peace and contentment go hand in hand. Because when we have contentment, we also have a peace in our spirit that even though everything's going chaotic around us, we can still say it's all is well with my soul. So Alexis, you can take it from there.
Yeah, and something to follow up with that is it starts with you may be facing the perfect storm, but Jesus offers the perfect peace. So yeah, this is talking about the peace that Jesus brings. And I want to start with scripture that Max Lucado has written in here. It's in Philippians chapter 4, verse 7. It says, the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through Jesus Christ. Jesus promises you his vintage of peace, the peace that calmed his heart when he was falsely accused, the peace that steadied his voice when he spoke, the peace that kept his thoughts clear and heart pure as he hung on the cross. This was his peace. This can be your peace. God takes responsibility for the hearts and minds of those who believe in him. As we celebrate him and pray to him, he constructs a fortress around our hearts and minds, protecting us from the attacks of the devil, as the verse from the ancient hymns declares. A mighty fortress of our God, a bulwark never failing, our helper he amid the flood of moral ill prevailing. The peace of God transcends all logic, scheming, and efforts to explain it. In this, it also says it talks about how individuals went through a hard time in hard waters is what it explains it as, and they said they describe it as this storm. It lasted for 14 days. 14 hours would shake you. 14 minutes would undo me. But 2 weeks of sunless days and starless nights, 14 days of bouncing, climbing towards the heavens and plunging towards the sea. The ocean boomed, splashed, and rumbled. The sailors lost all appetite for food. They lost all reason for hope. They gave up. And when they gave up, that's when Paul spoke. Paul said, but after a long abstinence of food, then Paul stood in the midst of them and said, men, you should have listened to me and not have sailed from Crete and incurred this disaster and loss. And now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. So this kind of is going to make more sense towards the end, but it's basically its purpose in this is saying that God, he gives you these warnings in life, and it's up to us whether we want to follow that or not. But either way, we have a consequence, and sometimes it's the consequence of peace when we listen to his word and his warnings, and sometimes it's the consequence of that action, and it may not be something that we enjoy. Here I have kind of like a question from the back. It describes all human nature vigorously resists grace because grace changes us, and the change is painful. Painful experiences in life are often amplified by the fact that they are changed or disrupted life as we know it, and they leave scars that change on us. And I think something that I've went through is one time we almost, not almost, I had to move out of my home and I had to live in like a 10 foot by 10 foot room that only fit a bed. And it had to fit me, my mom, um, and then basically my little sister in there. And we all had to sleep in the same bed for a while. And it was, we were all going through it emotionally. And I think that of that season a lot. And because I went through those hard times, I think that's what brought me a lot of patience. I think it brought me a lesson that, even though that's not the ideal circumstance, I was going through a quote unquote storm, is what they like to describe it as in this book. It taught me a lot, and it taught me to be grateful of the things that I have now. It taught me to be grateful for the room I had. I know when I got my own room after those hard times, I cleaned it every single day. I still keep my room clean every single day because we often get these gifts from God and we just almost have, I want to say, like a greed where we want more and more. We take things for granted almost. And I took those times for granted. And now that, I'm out of that tough storm and things have calmed down, I can see more of uh, the blessing in the things that I have. But to continue, the peace that kept his thoughts clear and heart pure as he hung on the cross was his peace. And this can be your peace. And they're talking about Jesus. Let God speak to you. Let God give you what he gave the sailors, and that is perfect peace. Paul began with a rebuke. Men, you should have listened to me. We don't like to be rebuked, corrected, or chanced, but we ignore God's warning. A scolding is an order. Are you in a storm of anxiety because you didn't listen to God? He told you that sex outside of marriage would result in chaos, but you didn't listen. He told you that the borrower is a slave to the lender, but you took on the dangerous debt. And now you're in a storm of your own making. I think a lot of the time when we get into these storms, we like to turn to God and almost with anger. I know I've been there. The storm I explained to you, the bad seasons I went through, I know I tried to blame God. And even different seasons of my life where there were consequences. I had God's warning and I still turned away and thought that I could control my own life and my own decisions. It bit me in the butt because I had to deal with those consequences and I tried to make it his issue when it was really my decision and my consequence that I now have to live out. Let God speak to you is one of the main messages in here. A lot of the time when I'm still learning and I'm still doing things that we like to say like I don't know how to describe it, like an unknowing sin where you're sinning, but you not really understand how you're sinning. And then we start to learn and we start to become convicted of those things. That's where we really need to listen because that's where he's trying to talk to you.
I want to add something.
Yeah.
When you said, and now you're in the storm of your own making, it goes on to say, if that describes you, God's rebuking you. But he only corrects those he loves, and he loves you. So stand corrected, confess your sin, and resolve to do better. Be wiser the next time. Learn from your poor choices. And I think that's probably a lesson in life. I know many people I deal with, they have made a series of poor choices. And the more they continue to make poor choices, the more habitual it becomes, which makes it more difficult to understand wise and accepting choices. And I think what Alexa's saying is correct, that, when we do mess up, we confess our sin, and that's, the Lord loves us, and his grace covers us. It covers a multitude of sins. But it's a learning experience that we need to deepen our dependency upon him, because he's going to correct us, just like a parent corrects their children. If you didn't correct your children, they would be little hellions, and sometimes they're anyways, but for the most part, they would be undisciplined, unruly, and that's not how you want to parent your child, nor is that how God wants to be with us. He wants us to be obedient because he knows it's for our best, because his plans are perfect for our lives. So I'll turn it back over to Alexis.
Yes. And something I can even say I needed to confess before I came clean to the grace of God and the storm I was going through was I had issues with marijuana use. And for the longest time, I liked to justify and say I had control of this. And even the times that I felt and I knew that it was wrong and I was convicted of the bad habits that it led me towards, the bad friendships I was getting into, I almost turned away from him because I knew that the path I was going down, and I turned away from him because I knew I had to confess to him if I didn't. So when I finally went to God and I gave it to him and I asked him to help me with this issue that I had, and I wanted to stop. I tried before, but I wanted to do it on my own. Everything was under my own control and it never worked out for me. And I gave him that, and that's when everything worked out. But beforehand, when I was ignoring these warnings from God, I was finding myself skipping school, not doing a big project, and I would have an A in the class and I would be dropped down to a whole letter grade. And those were consequences of my own actions. And I would have to do meetings on my attendance, and those were consequences of my own actions. But I had those warnings for God, and that's what happened because of it. But to continue, it kind of goes over, like Ken said, the story contains while the story contains one rebuke, it also contains 3 promises that can give us peace in the middle of a storm. And I'm going to kind of go over these things. It starts with heaven has helpers to help you. Paul said, "There stood by me this night an angel. On the deck of a sinking ship in a raging storm, Paul received a visitor from heaven. An angel came and stood beside him. Angels still come and help us." Recently, after a church service, one of our members approached me in the reception line. Her eyes were full of tears and wonder as she said, "I saw your angel." He replied with, "You did?" And then she replied, "Yes, he stood near you as you preached." He goes on to say how he felt comfort in that thought, also finding many scriptures to support it, like one in Hebrews chapter 1, verse 14. All the angels are spirits who serve God and are sent to help those who receive salvation. I want to kind of go over the prophet Daniel. He experienced this assistance of angels. He was troubled. He resolved to pray. After 3 weeks, David saw a man dressed in linen with a belt of gold around his waist. His body was like topaz. His face was lightning. His eyes were fire. His legs and arms resembled burnished bronze. His voice was like the roar of a multitude. Daniel was so stunned he fell to the ground, and the angel said, "Don't be afraid, Daniel. Since the first day you begin to pray for understanding and to humble yourself before God, your request has been heard in heaven. I have won an answer to your prayer." But for 21 days, the spirit prince of the kingdom of the Persia blocked my way. Then Michael, one of the archangels, came to help me, and I left him there with the spirit prince of the kingdom of Persia. Now I'm here to explain that will happen to your people in the future. The moment Daniel began praying, the answer was issued. Now I'm going to go to the second reason, and that's heaven has a place for you. God signed this. When you gave your life to him, he took responsibility for you. He guarantees your safe arrival into his port. You are his sheep, and he is your shepherd. Jesus said, I am your good shepherd. I know my sheep, and I know my sheep know me. That's found in John chapter 10, verse 14. You are a bride, he is your bridegroom. The king is being prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. You are his child, he is your father. You are no longer a slave, but God's own child. And since you are his child, God has made you his heir, which is found in Galatians. The third reason is you are in the Lord's service. God has given Paul an assignment, carry the gospel to Rome. Paul had not yet arrived at Rome, so God was not yet finished with him. Since God was not finished, Paul knew he would survive. Most of us don't have a clear message like Paul's, but we do have the assurance that we will not live one day less than we are supposed to live. If God has work for you to do, he will keep you alive to do it. All the days planned for me were written in your book before I was one day old, which is found in Psalms chapter 139, verse 16. A big message within this is we should expect to see the God of ages fight for you. He is near as your next breath. I want to kind of go over the story in the very end of this. It talks about this kid, Ben. He jumped out of his car and found Noah on the pavement. He's alive, Ben shouted, and placed him on a seat. Noah's legs were covered in blood, and he was shaking violently. Anna hurried over to the passenger seat and held Noah in her lap as Ben drove to the ER. Incredibly, the test showed no broken bones. A 5,000-pound vehicle has run over his legs. Yet, little Noah had nothing but cuts and bruises to show for it. Later that night, Anna dropped her to her knees and thanked Jesus for sparing her son. She then stretched out on the bed next to him. He was asleep, at least she thought she was. As she was lying beside him in the dark, he said, Mom, Jesus catched me. She said he did. Noah replied, I told Jesus thank you, and he said you're very welcome. Contrary winds, crashing waves, they come, but Jesus still catches his children. He still extends his arms. He still sends his angels. Because you belong to him. You can have peace in the midst of the storm. The same Jesus who sent the angel to Paul sends this message to you. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. That's in Isaiah. You may be facing the perfect storm, but Jesus offers the perfect peace. And that is the end to our book, Anxious for Nothing by Max Lucado.
Yeah, as Lexus said, that ends this study. Thursday, we will be back talking more about Prodigal God. We'll be on chapter 4, the next chapter of the book. And then Monday, we will not be here on Monday. And then Tuesday and Wednesday, we will be doing a couple lessons out of Charles Stanley's book, 30 Principles of Living with God. And then next Thursday, again, we'll be back on the Prodigal God. And then we'll be starting a new book probably in the next 3 weeks, which talks about idols that we have in our own lives. So with that, we're going to conclude. We hope you all have a good evening. I hope something has resonated with you through this book. And thank you again.
Yes,
Good night.
thank you.